Hello and welcome to the third episode of Talking Heads. Today's episode is a BSB special, as you might have guessed by the photographs behind me. I'm Michael Mann, web editor for Bennetts BikeSocial. I'll be your host. So this is our weekly roundup. It's a chat show style format. Of what's happening in the world of motorcycling, usually with some of us from Bennetts BikeSocial. We've got special guests involved, and also, for the first time today, our Bennetts customer. So first of all, we say thank you to Shoei Helmets, who are sponsors of this episode, who reliably informed me that they've got 11 championships between them, Shoei Helmet riders and the BSB, 11 championships. There you are, fact of the day. I'd also like to give a bit of a shout out and thanks to some of those who left comments and positive stuff following the last episode. That's the maintenance one that John and the two Steves and Nick did last week. So big shout outs go to Rob Holloway, Carol and Dave, the Parmatron, Tom Gallagher and Sue Jones. But yeah, thanks to everybody for watching and commenting. Okay, joining me today, Chris Newble, our very own SEO and social media manager. Chris, you've pretty much graced every BSB paddock for the last 3 seasons, right?
I have indeed, yes. So feeling a bit alien these last few months. I should be in pit lane, checking the latest liveries coming out and the latest riders being revealed. So yeah, bit of a strange few months, but excited to have a natter today about some BSB.
Fab stuff. Chris Holttum, our Bennetts Rewards customer, a Ducati rider, a bit of a BSB race fan. Welcome, Chris.
Morning, guys.
Do you remember the first ever time you watched a motorcycle race, either live or?
Yeah, funny enough, I was racking my memory banks. 1990, I rode there on my TZR 250, went to Brands Hatch, Easter weekend. I think they used to call it Power Bike. So yeah, that was my first experience as an adult, I'd say.
Good job, man. And today's special guest, well, not that either of the Chris's are that aren't special enough, but we've got the series and race director of the Bennetts British Superbike Championship, Stuart Higgs. Welcome, Stuart.
Good morning, everyone.
Morning.
So, we've chosen this date, specifically Easter Sunday, because today should have been round 1 of the 2020 Championship. We should have been sitting at Silverstone, basking in the sunshine, watching some incredible racing. But it's all gone to pot, really. Stuart, perhaps you'd like to tell us a bit more about your role, about how you're involved with the race series, how long you've been involved as well.
Morning, thanks, Michael. Well, I think if you chop me in half, you'll probably see the letters BSB through the middle of me. Held various roles in the championship through its various incarnations. I mean, we're currently in what we consider the period that started in 1996, but I've been involved around racing through. Annoying my father, who was one of the organisers at Brands in the 60s and 70s. So my first experience at Brands Hatch would have been probably if not conceived in the woods at Dingledale, which is probably not a nice thought for a holy day. Every part of my life has really revolved around racing. So, but professionally since 2001, employed full-time in racing, various roles beforehand, excuse me, and in the most recent period from 2008, heading up MSV's stewardship of the championship, which takes us through to present day.
You're involved in other series as well. You get involved with MotoGP and World Superbikes as well, is that right?
Yeah, I'm on the FIM panel of officials, so particularly for MotoGP, part of the MotoGP stewards panel. Obviously, I'm clerk of the course for the British Grand Prix when it's held at Silverstone. Also, when travel permits, hop over to the USA to work with Wayne Rainey on the Moto America series, since that was launched back in 2015. But all the aforementioned championships, obviously nothing's really happening much at the moment. So instead of looking at a bank of TV screens, which should have been the glorious Silverstone circuit, it's an array of screens seeing yourselves, which as attractive as you all are, it's not the same.
No, definitely.
Well, you're used to seeing Chris every weekend anyway.
Yeah, well, we do have a sort of a noobs cam, which we see in pit lane. Obviously, it's important that he doesn't stray into areas where he's not authorised.
It's not difficult with that hair, is it? You can see it from space.
So it is actually a hazard in the pit lane. Obviously, riders have complained to us that. I mean,
especially with the hairspray.
the pit lane is quite wide, but not always wide enough.
Okay, Stuart, that brings us on to obviously lockdown, coronavirus. What is the latest official line? We know that, or the last thing that we knew was a couple of weeks ago when the announcement came that the first 3 rounds have been postponed, haven't they? Silverstone, Donington and Holttum. But has anything moved on since then?
No, that's the position. The two governing bodies in the UK are MCRCB and the ACU, which look after all levels of motorcycle racing, and in particular MCRCB, motorcycle circuit racing at British Championship level. So they're all aligned, and at the moment the suspension of activity goes on up to and including the end of May, which has postponed the first 3 events. Obviously, it's a bit of a waiting game to see how the government restrictions will play out over the next weeks and potentially months. I mean, it's we have no particular inside information. We're obviously just reading and seeing the trends across other parts of the world and hoping that we can come back to some sense of normality later on in the year. I mean, I think it's unrealistic to think that we're going to flick a switch on May the 31st and we're all going to go racing the week after. But we're taking a pragmatic view. We're working with all our teams to look on potential calendar scenarios that come online, anything from say June through to July, August, and even September.
So, like you said, obviously you're making contingency plans as and when we might come out of lockdown, etc. MotoGP obviously said yesterday that they might not be able to get racing again unless there's actually a vaccine due to the amount of different people that travel to their paddock. With BSB, obviously we're not limited as much with that. Will that play into our advantage at all, do you reckon?
No, almost certainly. I mean, they are almost incomparable. I mean, one series has 4 jumbo jets full of cargo, of which much of it's still sitting in Doha, I understand, because they obviously didn't know where the next race would be. Most of the MotoGP travelling community, a lot of them come from Spain and Italy, and it's multiple nationalities. All different countries have got different travel restrictions and embargoes on at the moment. And that's obviously not a challenge that we have. We obviously have one of our riders is based in Australia. Obviously, at some point, we've got to get him over here. We've got Hector Barbera based in Spain. Ducati or PBM team have a Ducati technician. But that's probably the sum total of personnel challenges. I think there are other challenges lying ahead in terms of the supply chain. Obviously, the whole industry is shut down, so parts and material is obviously going to be something that is going to be a concern. I mean, as it happened, I mean, our fuel supplier comes from Italy. It's Panterace Fuels. Obviously, our official tyre supplier is Pirelli, but the material is produced in Germany. As of this moment, the material for the first 3 races was secured and available. So we were always in a position to be up and running for the first 3 events. So I think we've mitigated any situation there. But the biggest challenge is the obvious one. It's going to be economic. If and when we get to a position where there is some regularity of employment and everything gets back going again, we have to understand what the position is with public events. Obviously, I think there are still some advantages over, say, Bennetts BSB race events. They're held generally in quite large rural locations as opposed to contained stadium areas. We hope that would have some positive treatment. But again, it's purely an assumption. And obviously, I think from our calendar perspective, we've kind of struck a little bit lucky in as much as we only account for 3 races from now until the end of May. If the British Touring Car Championship, for example, have 3 races between the end of March and the end of April. So by the time they get to the end of May or June, it's almost 50% of their calendar. So our calendar has always given due respect to the major roads events, Northwest 200 and Isle of Man TT. So we've never had a big concentration in that first part of the year. So anything that we do in the summer and then late summer into autumn was pretty much there already. There's going to be a little bit of a concentration of events when we see what we've got to deal with, and that's really the balancing act. It's a bit of an unknown, but I'm still pretty positive that we can still maintain something with a redistribution of races across available events. And as always in these situations, I mean, the biggest priority is public health and making sure everyone is well. And obviously our activity is a high risk sport. Obviously, the last thing we want to do is become a burden on the public health services. So we have to obviously understand and be respectful to the public health situation and get all the necessary green lights that we're going to be doing activities which are acceptable to the public health services. Obviously, we're pretty self-sufficient with our own facilities, but of course, I think the last thing any of us need as a community and a pastime is to be giving the NHS more work than they need. But it's a lot of balls up in the air at the moment. I would hope by the end of April we'll start getting some real understanding of the direction of travel, and then we can then crystallise the scenario that we've dreamt up that's the most applicable, and that's going to take some some consultation with our teams and understanding what they can achieve as well, because there is not one single facet of the industry that's not affected by this. When it comes down to a junior super sport team with a dad and a lad racing, dad's business isn't working. Racing is for many a recreational thing as much as anything else, and tough challenges have to be made. At the other end of the spectrum, I'm really impressed and almost overwhelmed by the attitude and the resolve of the team owners. They've all pledged so far that they're in a position where they're looking good to go. Obviously, some of their things are going to depend on outside influences, but this week we unveiled the RAF Regular and Reserves Kawasaki, which was fantastic. This was going to be a really important year, obviously, with Vision Track Ducati and Cinetic BMW. Bringing new sponsors into our activity is not easy, and the fact that we had two major sponsors end their tenure in Tyco and BWeiser, and then we're able to replace them with those strong new sponsors is testament to the championship. So it's going to be a rough ride, but I think if with a large dose of luck and all the personalities involved, we will get through this.
Yeah, so obviously, the clock's ticking and nobody knows when we're going to come out of this, but would you be looking to sort of dovetail any of the cancelled events into the season and maybe extend it further into later October?
I mean, at the moment, the calendar is scheduled to end on, I think, the 18th of October that weekend. We can probably go one further weekend into October. That's historically been occupied over the last 20 years. It was those, I think you mentioned earlier, the Brands Power Bike meeting. So we could go 1 week later. We would lose overnight on the Saturday night of that weekend daylight saving time, but that's not impossible. And look at weather trends. September and October has been a reasonably stable month for weather over the years, and look, this is the UK. We've lost races in July for rain and hail and things like that. So it is a bit of a luck of the draw. But I mean, we certainly wouldn't countenance going into November. That is too late. And there is a balance to be struck. We want to do something credible for the remainder of the year when in the active period that we hope we can. We hope we can operate in, but we don't want to massively overload it so it actually compromises season 21, because I think this is going to be a delicate walk with the economic situation, and we want something credible, and obviously from the spectators as well. I mean, everyone's bruised by this, and I think sport, whilst it's a massive fillip to everyone's life, you can't do it every weekend. There's going to be, people are going to be easing. There's going to be people that are mad keen, ready to go. But obviously, everybody, I think for the majority, want to ease our way into this. But we'll get it right, I'm sure.
You talked about contingency already. You talked about the road racing season. I don't want to put it this way particularly, but it's almost playing into your hands because those events have been cancelled. It gives you that contingency, I guess, if we get to a state where we can start going to these public places, public events, and we can look at a contingency calendar. Are those? I mean, have you got a big folder of if it happens at this week we can do this, and then what happens then, and what's the first? Is it the calendar that is the first thing that we should be looking at, or you should be looking at?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, my last document I've got on my desk here is version 12, and that was written on the 20th of March, and there's probably a few scribble notes beyond that. But the roads events are obviously very, very different to closed circuit events in terms of the planning that they need, road closing orders, the effect it has on the local communities and people's way of lives. And obviously, I guess it's very difficult if a community's been locked down. It's pretty unpalatable to then impose any kind of lockdown when normality returns for a sporting event. So they've got different challenges to what we've got. But for sure, I mean, the calendar is going to be, I'm sure, incredibly congested, not just from motorsport, but everyone is throwing their events into August, September and October. We saw the Le Mans 24-hour car race, I think that's going for mid-September. Various other sports are log jamming that month. So from a TV broadcast perspective, obviously everyone's sort of waving their contracts at the broadcast, saying, "Hey, but we were here first." So I mean, again, it goes back to what I said earlier. I mean, because the balance of our calendar still takes place in what we hope will be the period where some normality has been restored, we're probably less affected than others. Obviously, like Formula One and MotoGP, they're up to about 7 or 8 or even 9 events postponed, and in case of Formula One, some already actually cancelled. So we've still got some flexibility, and obviously from our position as MSV, as the circuit operator, we do have the relative luxury of obviously being masters of our domain in terms of calendar planning. We can shuffle and look after ourselves before perhaps visiting championships. So we'll use that to our advantage, I'm sure.
Yeah, just touching on your last comment there, obviously, and Chris, we've got a customer of ourselves here. In terms of ticket sales and people that purchase tickets, did you just want to cover that as they're obviously still going to be honoured and all what the setup is?
Yeah, I mean, I direct everyone to MSV's website in terms of MSV circuits. That's principally obviously what I can talk with some 100% knowledge on. The other independent circuits, they would have published their conditions, but certainly for MSV, if you've bought a ticket already and the event is postponed, should the event be postponed to a new date, that ticket is completely valid for the new date. If for whatever reason you can't make that new date, then we will refund the ticket, and if the event ultimately ends up being fully cancelled, then we'll refund the ticket then as well. So I think all bases are covered.
Obviously, the gap we've got now. Any more pre-season testing?
No, I mean, one of the things we've been really keen to do is, and the teams have fully agreed, is that we just don't want to we don't want to incur any expense. I mean, as an activity, we couldn't do it anyway. All the circuits are closed. We certainly couldn't have any justification for having any form of demand on medical services to go motorbike race testing in this period. So the circuits are locked down, and there's just no need. No team needs to spend one single pound on any form of consumable. I think if we understand when the season reactivates, I think it's probably reasonable to say we might do some form of test or even extend whatever the first event is so that people can get dialed back in. I think it'd be a bit wild to sort of have everyone like caged animals for 3 or 4 months and then throw them into a couple of hours of practice and go racing. So that's one of the things we're looking at. But again, until we know when we potentially could start and then where we could potentially start, then it's joining all those dots together.
You could have an open pit lane for all classes, couldn't you, and just see how it went?
We could, Chris, but that would be rather silly. I think I would refer you back to my comment about being an unreasonable demand on the health services.
That'd be mayhem.
We talked about circuits. Obviously, they're all locked down. Obviously, nobody's working at them at the moment, but there was a great deal of maintenance that was going on. I appreciate you can only perhaps talk about the MSV circuits, but new bridges, new gravel taps, moving things around. Is that the kind of stuff that will be finished before any kind of racing takes place, or is it just a case of, do you know what, let's crack on?
No, I mean, everything was pretty much completed. I mean, in the case of Brands, there was a big safety improvement done to the outside of the final corner, moving the protection back and re-establishing debris fence and new gravel bed. And obviously the circuits aren't operational just between March and October. Obviously there's track activity nearly every day and certainly every weekend, be it track days, cars, bikes, whatever. So my understanding, certainly even from non-MSV circuits, is all the works that were done were completed. In fact, we are doing something. There is Thruxton are doing something that they did have planned for the end of the year. They are trying to move that forward to use the downtime, because they do have such restrictions there that they may well have to run later on in the year. So it makes more sense if they're going to be dormant for sort of 8-9 weeks to do some work now. So it's an interesting time. I mean, I think we'll probably have some Armco painting parties at Brands Hatch just to sort of keep us from losing our sanity. So I think we'll just like change the colours every week.
What you talk about the track days, track activity, and again, I assume it's just MSV circuits you can comment on, but there's a hell of a lot of activity that makes money for each of these circuits and makes the business that is MSV tick over. Should anybody be worried about circuit closures, circuit issues, in terms of cash flow, in terms of business?
Well, I mean, it's a worrying time. I mean, circuits have to be run a bit like aeroplanes. They have to be in the air and all seats occupied, and every day that isn't is a churn on the resource. Obviously, the special facilities the government have put forward in terms of, I think, on some relaxing on business rates and things like that. All that's going to help, but these are big facilities. I mean, if just taking Brands Hatch, if you just spent £150,000 in the winter on moving a gravel bed back, and yet there is not a wheel turning, that's a big challenge to manage that set of economics. So I mean, I think it is a worrying time. I mean, you certainly look at, say, a circuit like Silverstone. The finances involved in the British Formula One Grand Prix are immense. When you get like a basic admission ticket is something like £200, something like that, and they have like a 200,000 crowd, and everyone paying at least that £200 base admission. Not that then on top of that, incredible prices for grandstands, like £400 or £500 for a grandstand seat. That is significant revenue that for the business generally, that's what they need to operate on. And like all of us, like every business, you need the turnover to make the thing work. And we've gone from good steady business. I think everyone sees our tracks as being good destinations for certainly track days, cars, bikes, and obviously race events, club events, cars, bikes, and the promoted events. This would have been, for example, at Brands Hatch, we would have already had every weekend in March would have been clubby car or clubby bike. Well, I think we would have had truck races, promoted truck race last weekend when the weather was fantastic. That would have been, I'm sure, a big crowd. It would have been British touring cars at Brands Hatch this weekend. And then across the rest of the group, we would have had touring cars already at Donington, and then Holttum Park in May. These are big events, constantly churning, and that's what our business has grown into, and that's what a circuit like Knock Hill or Mallory Park or anywhere needs. If the race events generate the testing, there's track days, other business and corporate events go on, and it's been reduced to zero across the board. So I mean, I can only say I hope we don't get any real big fallout, but you can't 100% say there won't be. I mean, it's a very worrying time, and I think we can stand probably a couple of months of it at best, but beyond that, I think the situation becomes absolutely critical.
Yeah, and I'll just ask one more question, really, on while we're talking about the coronavirus and the lockdown, about finances. Then we'll move on to perhaps something a bit chirpier. Again, you talked about dads and lads earlier on, and certainly talking about the way in which businesses are working and the businesses are being affected. Of course, that's going to affect team sponsors, team owners, riders, and their jobs. Do you fully expect a sort of a 100% fulfilled grid across every class when we do get returning to racing, or is it just pie in the sky stuff at the moment?
No, I mean, I don't know, and B, I think you would have to expect there to be, some negative outcome to this. It's impossible for there not to be. To the extent we don't know. I think in all walks of life, this won't be a case of just flicking a switch and everything just comes back on exactly how it was. On the flip side, there is always some unforeseen opportunity that comes out of this. But I don't think anyone genuinely knows. I mean, we can just hope that everyone's been able to mitigate their losses and come out of it with something salvaged. I mean, we have been through severe economic times beforehand. I mean, 08, 09 and 10, say when the credit crunch, there wasn't a huge downturn then in terms of participation numbers and spectators at events. In fact, the opposite was occurred with spectators at events. We did quite a lot of polling on this, and it became apparent that where people would have been having perhaps family holidays in Europe or elsewhere, is that people were reining it in and discovering that nice weekends away at race events with family and friends was a nice pastime. It didn't break the bank. It was good value for money. It was very sociable, and you could do more of it. So if you trade in the family weekend in, I don't know, say Lanzarote in the summer for doing half a dozen nice weekends away at Holttum Park or Cadwell Park or Brands Hatch in those great sort of camping weekends, we discovered that, and that was definitely the period where I think the audience went up, and I think there could be some evidence of this again. But the difference this time is that, in the credit crunch, I think most people were affected, some more than others. But in this situation, it's literally everyone is affected. And I think it's just determining what's able to be salvaged in this period. But, I think we are all in it together. So until we know fully, we don't know. So you could tuck yourself into an early grave from stress with the situation. But I do firmly believe that sport, people are going to want to promote, people are going to want to market, people they do want to prove a point that they can overcome it. And I think that's where sport is a massive thing in everyone's lives, and we want to play our part by trying to put on something that is a great benefit to people's lives. And it's what we talk about. It's what we can. We could do this activity and probably talk about it all day, because it draws on experience and things we like about our lives is motorcycling. I mean, what I've been touched by this period. I mean, social media, we're bringing together. I think they've called it Trackanori. There's Rob McElnay, Steve Sawford, James Whitton, Steve Parish. Other than probably now completely ruining Steve Parish's book sales, because all these stories are now in the open, which he probably won't be very happy about. It actually has reminded you that we've all been around this hell of a long time. It's all very human. And this could be a period in the future we reflect on. Do you remember that time, the lockdown in 2020? But I think the energy that the pastime of motorcycling and the sport of motorcycle racing in particular, what that brings to people. It's a privilege to work in this profession, because if ever you want to learn life skills, I think you find it in this community. And when you see the doom and gloom on the news and some of the appalling, I wouldn't call it journalism even, I see you learn more from real people. And motorcycling, I think there's an authenticity about motorcycling and motorcycle people where it just cuts all the nonsense, and you get to hear things how they are, and the enterprising schemes and the energy to get things done is incredible now in our community. And obviously talking to our BSB medics, there you've got people that these people are absolutely on the front line, having the worst experience of their lives, and they can't wait to go racing because they just can't wait to go and pick someone out of a gravel trap at Brands Hatch, and you think, wow, how can people be so positive? And you got team owners, and you think, God, how is this going to all be held together? And they're like, well, no, it's what we do, and I firmly believe, I think as a group of people, we show a lot of character, and I think that will get us through this as much as anything else.
Quite a rousing answer, thank you, Stuart. Stuart Higgs for Prime Minister. Newbes, what you got?
Yeah. Well, I want to just look back at last year, really, when we could ride bikes and go to the races. What an amazing year for Bennetts BSB, really. We had Scott Redding coming into the championship, and he created a bit of a whirlwind, really, didn't he?
The story couldn't have been better staged. I mean, of course, the normal naysayers of doom said, oh, no, Haslam's gone and Dixon had gone and Shane was obviously long-term injured. It's all going to fall flat on its face. And it's like the one thing that, when someone says that is there's nothing more satisfying than ramming that theory back down someone's throat. Because we just had an incredible year. I mean, the first race, if anyone would have said that Josh Elliott was going to be leading the championship after round one, you'd have probably sort of had them sectioned. But it was incredible. I mean, the first race, I think it was the McCann's boys had a bit of an issue going through the last corner on the last lap. We had Josh Elliott, as I said, taking his maiden win a bleat after Taran got penalised. O'Halloran was strong from the get-go. The Ducatis had a shocking first round, if I recall, and it was like, the V4's never going to work, and how wrong we were. But it was an incredible year. I mean, that first round. I don't think there was ever a first round like it in terms of scene setting, expectation, quality of the racing. The weather was fantastic, and there was just a feeling of ascendancy throughout the whole year, and it was just momentum building. And Scott was an incredibly colourful character. I think he was good for the championship bowls. I think the championship was good for him, and I think there's a not very well known story is that obviously the news broke, or was being talked about as far back as Thruxton in 2018 about Scott potentially coming to the championship, and I took great delight when I sort of mentioned it in a passing conversation. The then MCN journalist was a chap called Ollie Rushby, who you might have some experience of, and he was sort of like quite arrogantly saying, "Oh, it'll never happen. What's he want to come here for? Blah blah blah." And I'd spoken to Birdie. Birdie had tipped me the knob. We knew it was likely to happen. So there was nothing more satisfying knowing it was likely to happen when you had every one of the so-called clever people telling you that it wasn't going to happen. So when it did happen, I happened to be on one of the flyaway races. I was sitting on a charter flight from Bangkok to Birmingham, and I hadn't really sort of had much to do with Scott, and we'd sort of exchanged pleasantries, and I just started talking to him just before we got on the plane. He was with a MotoGP buddy and Jack Miller and people like that, and it was the Wednesday it was going to be announced, and I said, "Hey, look, ready for the announcement, and looking forward to it." And we did. It was getting quite quiet. But I said, I think you'll be pleasantly surprised at the reaction, knowing full well that when our socials kicked in, and with the help of Chris and all my team, when we go big, we go big with our announcements, and we just flood the channels with it. And it got announced, and I was sitting on this flight, and I could hear and there was this noise started bubbling, mostly in Spanish and Italian, and I think the general gist of like, what the hell is he doing? And I could see him getting a bit, not necessarily affected, but he was definitely sensitive to it. But then all of a sudden, the traction kicked in of the UK fan base, which was nothing, fully, wow, it's happening. No one really believed it was going to happen. And it was like seeing him go from black and white into colour, if that makes sense, is that he'd obviously thought long and hard about it. It was a big risk to do it. He talked it up as much as he could to himself, but he knew I think he was going to get a massive dose of raised eyebrows from the Grand Prix community. And I really felt for him at that point, but it was just really good seeing that he was definitely getting fed by the energy that was coming from the fans. And then the first time we really sort of got talking to him a bit in Spain and Portugal at the tests. And then at the Silverstone test, I think you did a piece with him at that test, didn't you? You did an interview with him or something like that. And it's the first time we started talking, and he certainly asked more questions than many riders in the championship. And I think at that point it just started clicking in that this was something a bit different. And I think then when he saw I mean, the first riders briefing, I mean, I think a BSB, well, having been to a MotoGP riders briefing and a BSB riders briefing, I can tell you that the two events couldn't be more different. And I think it was really sort of like a real eye-opener seeing the relationship between myself and the riders, which is, frankly, I think we have a better relationship. There's more trust, and it's just you feel that connection. And I think sort of that opened his eyes further. And then we got into the heat of battle. Obviously, everyone was going for him. There's a bit of a target on his back. I think we dealt with everything how it needed to be dealt with, and then. As much as he plugged into the audience plugged into him. It was self-serving in both directions. I mean, we certainly didn't all run around saying it's all about him and nobody else. Respect is earned in the BSB paddock, and a track like Holttum that he wouldn't know which way was up the first time he saw the place. To come to those circuits when everyone was saying, "Oh, you haven't got a chance," and then just to dig in and learn and be inquisitive and put on such a show. And in the meantime, the rest of the championship was unfolding in the way it normally does. It was just an incredible spectacle. It's one of those once-in-a-generation championships, certainly.
Is he going to be missed, do you think?
Yeah, I think we always have to be, no one person is bigger than the championship, blah, 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 but in any sport. But no, he moved things on. I think his engagement with the fans is something that was, everyone. I think there's a balance to be struck. I mean, I think if you go back to say Rossi, the ultimate showman, could do the business on the track and off the track, and then I think it was when Lorenzo then started winning some races, and Lorenzo started trying to mimic some of the after race antics of Rossi, and they were never quite the same, and everyone was sort of like, I think you've either got it or you haven't.
Yeah, jumping
if you can do all the off track and have the person, yeah, absolutely. If you can do the business on the track and you've got that personality that just engages. I mean, my dear old nemesis Guy Martin, his results will never stand there in a Hall of Fame against someone like Ian Hutchinson, but rightly or wrongly, people remember Guy Martin because he engaged with the public in a way that nobody else can or does. And I think Scott has that real throwback to the 70s, the Sheen Hunt type era. Doesn't give a monkey's, says it how he sees it. Look, visually is obviously very imposing. Sort of, it just stands out from the crowd. But a real breath of fresh air for the championship. I think if others looked at that and thought that will help them, I don't think you can just replicate it because you've got to have all the personality traits to go with it. But I think it definitely is a lesson in, to be out there and to dominate, and it's part of their psyche as well. If you know that you're the man and you're strutting around and you're commanding the attention because people are really warming to you, then that energy, I think, does translate into your sporting performance. Why wouldn't it? It's all part of the psyche of it. But I think there's other riders coming up through. I mean, oddly enough, I think the guy that's probably going to be the closest person to him in personality over the coming years could be someone like Storm Stacey. It's almost like the Reading playbook in terms of, started off really, really young, had some, obviously some personal challenges as well, but, it's just that little bit different. You can't describe it. It's just that different way of operating. I mean, I think he'll. I think for me, he could be the, I'd say the new Scott Redding, but the one that sort of is, from a personality point of view, would be probably closest to him. But no, for everybody else, I mean, you need to have that mix of personalities. I mean, that's what I think all sports sorely miss. I mean, if you go back to the glory days of World Superbike, you've got, the classic era was, of course, Fogarty. Heart of a lion, the cross of St George everywhere,
the eyes of a madman.
Taking it to Scott Russell. Real sort of like allowing the media and the fans to really get behind the whole, Foggy v the World type thing. That whole mid-90s period was incredible, and I think a lot of other sports, everyone just operates to this kind of very corporate standard that is frankly a bit dull. You need to have people at either end of the personality spectrum, and they're always going to be the people that are clinically devastating when it comes to performance, and they might be introverts. That's kind of who people are, and you have to accept that. But when you just have clones of people all being the same, it's very difficult in most sports. And I think if you go, I find, in all sports I can recall personalities from probably 20 years ago rather than contemporary people, be it tennis, golf, motor racing, football, anything. And I think that's where a lot of sports gone wrong, is that we know more about people than ever before with social media, and maybe that's half the problem. Is maybe when people were enigmas, they were more interesting because you didn't quite understand them. But I definitely recall sort of early 500 Grand Prix. I mean, the era of like Schwantz, Rainey, Lawson, Doohan. I mean, there was an aura about these people when they walked around paddocks. I mean, Agostini, when you see him, when he comes and does historic stuff, there's this kind of natural barrier of about 2 meters around him because you feel this superstar quality. Now, with the greatest of respect, if Alex Riddens walked into my local pub, I wouldn't even know what he looked like. I think that's I think that's the weirdness of all sport now, is that you have to revere your sports stars for them, and then they become really interesting and compelling to watch, and that's what makes the sports stars you love and the sports stars that you don't like. That's all part of it. The teams you like and the teams you don't like. But very very long answer to a question. But I mean, I think that's where Redding comes into this, is that he becomes one of these people that even people that aren't into it, he would be memorable. Like, who's the wild guy with the wild hair and the tattoos, rather than who's the person that just looks like everybody else, that says the same as everybody else.
You touched on Storm Stacey there. He's obviously 16, riding a super. I think it'll be 17 maybe when the championship kicks off. But
this is actually all down to him, actually. So we just needed to make him legal to ride. So we just postponed all the races. So he doesn't fall foul of the age now. So.
Because he would have been the youngest ever. Because I think Harry Hartley, he was quite young when he.
Yeah, I think he was like 17 years and a day, and there was a guy, Tony Wastenage, I think his name was, back in the late 90s, early 2000s. But Storm would have been 16 years, 361 days. So it would have been the youngest.
And he was good in testing. He wasn't shy. He seemed to get stuck in.
Really, really, really good. And methodical approach. I mean, Monte Blanco is obviously a circuit that I don't think he'd ever seen before. Pretty challenging. Obviously, not necessarily university light because it's a bit stop-start in places. Really hard on tyres. But then going to an amazing track like Jerez, Grand Prix standard, and just cutting laps and just not trying to chase silly lap times, but just learning. So I mean, it was bodes really well, and I'm really pleased for the team as well, because I mean that 25 years, or is it 20 or 25 years that Brent Gladwin's been running that team, and he's picked up some championships along the way, and not really had the recognition he deserves. I mean, he was the guy who put Carl Harris on the map back in the inaugural Superstock 1,000 year back in, I think it was 1999, and these teams, and again, just going back to the whole CV situation we're talking about, he's it's yet to be announced yet, but he, as acquiring sponsorship in the most difficult of climates, he's doing a pretty good job on that front as well, Brent. So all credit to him.
You've got some older characters and younger characters, and you say there with Storm, he's obviously gonna cut people slack from his perspective, and the older guys are gonna have to do the same for him, really, because it's a bit of an apprenticeship, really, for the lad, isn't it? On the larger bikes, he's got some big characters to deal with as well. Do you think he'll stand up well against the mental tests against these guys?
Yeah, but I think he's got some good heads around him. I mean, Jeff Crust, who is the team, the crew chief or team manager, or second in command, whatever you want to call it. And he worked with Wayne Rainey back in the Marlboro Yamaha Roberts days. So, I mean, there's some experienced heads in there. I mean, we saw last year with Ryan Vickers. I mean, had a bit of a mixed season, but there were times where Ryan was absolutely astonishing in terms. I was watching one of the Eurosport replays yesterday. I think he was on the second or third row at Holttum Park round 2 last year, and it, which is incredible. I mean, we're always getting various hacks have a go at us. Oh, there's no talent coming through the UK unless you've gone to Spain as a 3-year-old. It's all hopeless. Blah 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 blah. These kids do exist in the UK. They might not be in the sort of like the as plentiful supply as the Spanish and Italians, but we do have some talent, and we have great teams. And I think with the right people around them and the right expectations set, they'll go far. I mean, Ryan in his second year this year, I think this is the year obviously he has to step up, but. Jake Dixon, I think in his second or his third year was challenging for a championship as well. So I think that the future bodes well as long as people keep their expectations sensible.
Do you think Hector Barbara, now he's had a couple of years at UK tracks, he'll start getting in the mix now as well? He's got a decent bike under him. Yeah,
he was really good in testing. I mean, the Rich Energy OMG team, I mean, really ambitious. I think that it's a good signing in Hector. I mean, one of the defining memories of last year when the JG Quattro Kawasaki team really had lost their way. The Glen Irwin situation was really, really, probably at breaking point already. And they brought Hector in for Donington, and it was Jack Valentine just said to me, so it was just incredible. Like you had a Grand Prix standard rider comes in there. Hector, I think, had been the top independent rider in MotoGP within 2 or 3 years of that. So I mean, this is a guy who clearly was world class, and the way he was able to just get on the bike and not just change everything. He said, no, the difference between a Grand Prix rider and a rider that's lost their way was one that just wants to change everything all the time and they don't know which way is up, whereas Hector was sort of he said, no, leave the bike as it is. He needed to sort himself out first and then he'd go back to the bike. I mean, it's probably an oversimplification, but I think in that team, again, Paul Curran's done an incredible job putting that team together on the operational side. They've got a wise old head in Ray Stringer. I mean, Ray's forgotten what most people might learn. He's been around the paddock for many, many years. From an engineering perspective, very, very wise. And it could be a bit of a surprise package. And I think, the BMW was always going to be the thing for 2019 that was going to be the weapon, but it was just never quite. It almost came a year too early. So with a lot more sort of time and water passing under the bridge, I think that potentially will be the bike of choice this year.
Testing obviously went well at Monte Blanco and Jerez. There didn't seem to be too many incidents or issues or problems, and it kind of prompted the fact that it got us all really excited that 2020 was going to be a fantastic season, because there was a good mix of riders who were putting in good times and a lot of laps and getting some proper development under their belts. And there were the BMW team, the Taz Racing team were missing, the Hawk Racing boys were missing, and the Honda Racing boys were missing. So once you add all those guys in as well, it's going to be it promises to be another fantastic season. But from what you saw at the pre-season testing, you're confident that 2020, as and when it does begin, is going to be as good as the last few.
Yeah, I mean, I think obviously when we start is the great unknown, and I think potentially the weight will add to will actually add to the competitiveness. I mean, some of the championships of previous years have been lost with people not being in a state of preparation and just running out of time and giving away quite a bit of ground at the beginning of the year. So I mean, I hope it's not a trend that we have to go that we can never start a season for August ever again. Just so that everyone can get ready. But, Honda had terrible material supply issues, and I guess this will give them a chance to catch up. Other teams were, again, not quite in a state of readiness. So I think, it gives more credence to the idea that if and when we do get a defined date for starting, it'd be important to perhaps have something that just extends the first event just to get everybody dialed in, because I think we want everybody to have the best possible chance to be competitive. And if it is going to be a condensed season, certain other factors come into it. if there's more, for example, triple header weekends, obviously if you have a problem in one of the races that renders you not fit technically or mechanically or in fitness wise for the rest of the weekend, it could be you're talking about a 75 points haul every weekend that you could give away. So that's going to be a bit of a different dimension if that's the kind of format that we end up having to operate. So if there's any races that run back to back, I mean, it's something that we've always tried to avoid, but I think it's looking pretty likely there will be a back-to-back race or two. So we want to keep that to a minimum. But again, if you suffer a problem at one event, a bit like the flyaway races in MotoGP, is if you're unlucky enough to knock yourself out on Motegi, you wipe yourself out for Phillip Island and Sepang at the same time. So that could throw up a bit of a curveball in how the points sort of play out in a potential new scenario.
In terms of sort of rules and regulations for 2020, there's a few changes to practice, I think, that you've made or are making.
Yeah, that's right, Chris. I mean, I'm trying to remember what they are, but I think our view was that to nick a little bit of what happens in MotoGP and to still keep our regular format, but it was a case of, I think, we had the 3 free practice sessions that open up the weekends. Excuse me, and I think we're going to take the top 6 from the free practice result and put them directly into Q2. So it then gives everybody else more track time and more visibility in Q1. So that what we found in Q1 is that you'd probably get a bit of a regularity of form, that 3 or 4 guys that you knew would always be there or thereabouts would probably cut a quick lap early in the session and then go and park up for the rest of the session. And then it just gives a bit of a distorted order that, you know, you got P1 to 4 probably sorted. So the real interest is P5 downwards, but that kind of doesn't make much of a story. So if we actually take the 6 consistent people across the free practices, put them direct into Q2, it gives every other team more visibility of chasing a P1 spot, which is good visibility for them. And then it just adds a bit of a dimension, and I think there could be some, you know, if there's a bit of a weather-affected quali, is that the riders that have obviously been in Q1 have got a bit of track knowledge going into Q2. So the people that know, it's the trade-off between not having to risk posting a time to get from Q1 to Q2, but you go into Q2 raw with a bunch of people that have seen the track. So it adds a bit of a new dimension to it. We've played around with the length of those sessions. I think it's 15 minutes for Q1 and Q2 and then 10 minutes for Q3, but having 12 people in Q3, so we're actually trying to sort out 4 rows in 10 minutes rather than 3 rows in 8 minutes, I think it was. So.
Just looking at the other series with the try options, you've got some younger guys coming in there. A guy that's done the TT a few times. Do you think he'll draw in some of the road racing fans? Because sometimes there's a bit of a separation there between, you know, track racing and road racing. Yeah,
I mean, Ultimate Pint. I mean, he's a man for all seasons. I mean, I think, you know, I mean, he's one step away from sidecar racing. I think so. I think he's fantastic. I mean, you know, he's a tremendous character, and privileged to have him in any championship. And I think running the Ducatis, I think it's great for that particular series. I think the character of that championship, it is good. You've got, you know, you're gonna have riders from complete other end of the spectrum, because you know, if you can't get the budget together to run in say Supersport, then you'd probably go for something like tri options. So it's a good series for cutting the teeth at national standard racing, maintaining your position in national championship racing for riders that don't want the cut and thrust of, say, Stock 1000. And then you know, riders like John McGuinness, who are clearly competitive. It's important that he keeps his eye in for the road stuff as well. So I think it fits very, very well. And I think the Ducati V2 will be a much anticipated bike to see on the tracks, and I'm looking forward to it.
Do you think you'll have a shock of the pace of the guys at the front.
Yeah, I think John's got a wise old head on him. I mean, he'll have a little tussle, but I don't think he's going to put himself in huge risk. But I think there'll be certain tracks I think he'll be incredibly competitive on, and I think John, when the visor goes down, I think John basically likes nothing more than riding motorbikes at the end of the day. So and pretty quick at that. So I think he'll be really comfortable within his comfort zone. He'll stick it to him when he needs to, and let a few people have the perception of having his scalp. But I don't think he'll lose much sleep over it somehow.
We actually had John on a customer track day last year at Alton Park, and after the first session, he come off and he was buzzing because he's not really had the opportunity to ride some of them UK circuits. I mean, back in the day, he was really handy in the British Championship. He's rode all sorts of bikes, and I remember watching him race Superstock 1000. He was more than competitive.
Yeah, I can remember that. Paget's bike, wasn't it?
Paget's Stock 1000, and then when you go back to the Vimto Honda RS250 GP type bike, incredibly versatile. He's a great guy. I've got a lot of time for him.
Just a few more years on him.
Yeah, on that day he rode a V4R for the first time. It belongs to Andre Compton. I think he was going to run with him in tri-options on the V2s, but Andre let him out on the V4R, and he came in after about 4 laps. His eyes were on stalks. He couldn't believe the grunt of the thing. He said, "My God, you get to 16,000 RPM." Unbelievable.
One of the things with John is so knowledgeable and respectful of the whole history of racing. I did a little surprise for him a few years ago when the Britain came over, and I got him and Scott Smart to ride it, because the two people I know are probably the most technically sympathetic and appreciative of some of the history. And he really sort of enjoyed the experience. And then I think it was the same event, or maybe the year before, when we had Agostini over for. We did some historic parades and things like that, and there was like a little chat show thing done, and it was just sitting with John, listening to. He just wanted to be in the audience, listening to stories, and just deeply sort of appreciative of the whole history of the sport. I think that's really a mark of his personality. And I doesn't realise that he's as much of the story of racing as some of the people he admires himself. It's very understated.
Stuart, there's I say rumours been circulating. It's probably journalists wanting it to happen more than anything, but about a sort of a naked class coming to the BSB. Is there any truth in that? Is it something you've thought of?
Yeah, we've regularly talked to some manufacturers, and actually, earlier this year started on another round of basically talking to the manufacturers of what they want. I think obviously with the current climate, manufacturers' positions are going to be very, very delicate, but on the flip side, more and more relevant as to which sectors are important to them and which need or deserve or require some form of sporting exposure. So I think there is a strong case for, a 900cc type, that 800 to 1,000 type, very broad parameter range that every single manufacturer has got something that would work. I have commissioned my boffin mate Neil Spalding to write me a set of rules. So that'll be quite interesting, but I think there is definitely a demand for him. I think it would be. I'd be interested to know what the broader public audience think about it. I think a lot of our classes visually look the same, so something that reflects the market and what people are buying and is visually interesting and competitive there's no downside to that. I think caution that obviously with the current climate, bringing any new race class in is never ever easy. Remember, you're talking to the guy that thought it was a good idea to have XR 1200 Harley Davidson's race. So I think there is some validity to it. Again, we're going to take some cautious moves to talk to the industry and who would have the appetite to run them, who would ride them. There's not a huge surplus of teams and budget and riders to look for a new class if there isn't room for it. But I think it's something that deserves much further exploration, certainly.
Could it ever be a one-make series? You just get one manufacturer involved?
Yeah, I mean, that is another possibility. I think that there's certain commercial advantages for that, but then there are other disadvantages that I think it'd be nice to... I think the manufacturers are going to want product to be promoted. And how they do that is going to be very, very challenging going forward. So if there is a sector where they can all be represented and it will enhance their engagement to racing, then I'd take it very, very seriously. I mean, at the moment, there's not one class where everyone's represented in, whereas this particular type of class, I think you could get up to 8 or even 9 manufacturers, because, I mean, you bring in MV, you've got Triumph, the Japanese for BMW, Ducati. I mean, I think, you guys know the market better than me, perhaps in that sector, but I think you could probably dream up quite easily a range of bikes from that parameter, from the parameters of, say, like 800, 900, 1,000, twins, triples, four, anything like that, that could be relatively comparable. I
think it'd work well if you had 2 different levels as well. You'd have an A and a B class or something like that, because there's so many MTF7s, MTF9s.
Star journalist level, which will obviously have your name all over it. But no, I mean, I think you're right. Like a pro naked bike crazy series, I like the sound of that.
News, what you got?
Well, it's just sort of last final few questions, really. Seeing if we've got you on the line, Stuart. Just in summary, what's some of your favourite standout moments in your tenure and in BSB? What's the 3 moments that most stand out to you?
I think obviously the Hill Hopkins final race of 2:11, just because. Not for no other reason than that day was really challenging for us. I mean, if anybody remembers the day, I mean, there was a big delay earlier on where we'd had some rain over the weekend, and then it got quite warm, and we had these weepers, as we call them, coming up through the track at Paddock Hill, and basically there was a competition where you would least like a little bit of moisture to come up. It's like the racing line on the blind apex of Paddock Hill Bend. So we were mucking about with that for about an hour, trying to dry it and then mark it and just try and just make something salvageable. Then it was a stock 600 race, and of course every lap someone would find one of these wet patches, and there was even a moment at that point during the day I thought, we might not be able to run this. Like, how the hell are we going to get out of this? So in the end it was okay. We'd put great. There was visual markings on the apex and extra warm-up laps, everyone, so they could get good visibility of the track conditions. Then there was a horrendous crash in the Superstock 1000 race. We were under a safety car condition, and John Crockford, I think, was unsighted and had the mother of all accidents on the start-finish straight, cannoned into the inside pit wall barrier, unconscious, medevaced out, really, really serious condition, and we were... He was going straight into, I think, theatre, and we were getting reports back, and it was really, the prognosis wasn't particularly encouraged at that time. And then I just remember it was then sort of, everything was still going on, but on a sort of autopilot, and it was like 5 laps to go in the final BSB race, and I sort of just like said to one of my assistants in race direction, as well, just what's the points in all this? And I went, well, basically, it's between Hill and Hopper, what you're seeing is the championship. And it sounds like I'm very disconnected from the event, but I mean, you go into this kind of autopilot thing, so it's not as if you don't know what's going on from an operational point of view. You very much do, but you got kind of the backstory of points and what it meant had just become almost irrelevant. And then when it suddenly came into it and you kind of saw what was going on and the reality of the drama on track, it was just incredible. I mean, it was just sort of like, I mean, I'll never forget the James Whittam commentary. Like, this is blokes racing, and it was, it was an incredible end. And then as we went into the evening, obviously we were going off the back of that. The situation on John had improved, and so that was a big relief. Probably Brands again with the emotion of the Haslam. after Haslam crashed on the final championship round, throwing the championship to Shane. That was incredible. Again, the emotion of it. I mean, people don't, you know, when you're running this thing, I mean, it's a weird emotion now because your brain is telling you that you're running something that isn't actually running. But when you're in it, it's like a living thing. Every day of every week, there's some influence, positive or negative. There'll be a commercial issue, an operational issue. There's obviously personal issues. There's injury. There's, you know, I get to, you know, it's a bit like a swan on the surface. It might look a bit graceful, but underneath we're pedalling like mad. And so you know the backstory, and the reality is certain bits of information get to me that don't ever get published in terms of some of the stresses of it all and the realities of what goes on. It's it's a political, commercial, just stuff really. So when you're running through it and then it comes to fruition, it's an incredible. The emotion and the adrenaline that goes through you is incredible. So I think most of the final rounds are the defining moments. And it's, I mean, the day when bloody Keogh cropped his collarbone on the Saturday, it was coming down to this fantastic final and that anti-climax of, and that was just like, you just almost just wanted to go home there and then. But then we had an incredible final round this year, was really good. It was in the balance across all three races when the pendulum between Alex and Shaky in whatever year that was, when they both managed to fall off on the second race of the weekend, and then it was just flip-flopping between the two of them. Assen for the first time was definitely a highlight. That was something that people said, you know, A, it shouldn't happen, and B, it couldn't happen, but it did, and it's been one of the highlights of the championship, just seeing our series unleashed on a circuit like that. Oddly enough, the first time we went to the Spanish tests in 2019, it's just sort of like bizarre seeing the series wheeling its way around somewhere like Portimao and this year at Jerez, and you just suddenly think, wow, like, you know, this has come a very long way. But I mean, every year there's something. I mean, it's very difficult to get those, you know, the one single thing. I think the joy of this job is it's a collection of lots and lots of personal personal victories over adversity. When you go through the winter and you line up on the grid, I mean, I think that's why this weekend is going to be such and today is Easter Sunday, the most tremendous body blow, because your brain is conditioned to be starting something. And we are creatures of habit. We've been doing this thing every year for the last 25 years plus. And when it's not happening, that's when the reality is going to kick in. And I've often read sports autobiographies about how people feel when they stop. And, it's a very difficult thing. It's like you lose that momentum and sense of purpose. So at the moment, we're in it, it's up and running, but it's not up and running. So I think if we're able to salvage something this year and get a good championship this year, this could actually be the most incredible season ever. As I think so many people would have remembered what they went through to get to that point, and we'll be delivering something that is really wanted and appreciated, and it will be very rewarding. I think that's probably the motivation for this year.
For me, as a spectator, race fan, it's fantastic to see the show, whether it's live or on TV. You've sort of branched out now into Assen. Any other circuits on foreign soil you're thinking of, sort of close to home, like France?
I mean, MSV has a circuit build projects underway in France. I mean, again, I can't speak for Jonathan Palmer, but I mean, I would say certainly this current situation will influence that process. There isn't a particular agenda for BSB to go necessarily there or anywhere else. I think Assen works. It's been a big addition to the championship. Everyone likes the trip. I think we have to be really careful on these sorts of things. And again, even more so now, it is by definition an expensive operation to go outside of the UK, and we got to be really, really careful with this. But the tracks in the UK are the jewels of our calendar. To have a championship that can be as diverse as Donington, Silverstone, Thruxton, Brands Hatch, Alton Park, Knockhill, I've always thought that the Bennetts British Superbike champion is the person that's conquered, Grand Prix standard tracks through to the Nadgery sort of like tight, short circuit, scratchy tracks. That's what the DNA of the championship is. You are a master of many different distances. It's not just very similar linear type tracks. So I think we've got to preserve what we've got, and I think the UK circuits will certainly be expecting us to make sure the championship supports them as well.
Especially now there's more tarmac in Cadwell paddock as well.
This is, yes, I mean, I think there's that great Blackadder sketch where they said that's the amount that's been captured by the German army. So, I mean, I think that's now the amount of tarmac in the Cadwell paddock. But, no, it's better, but no, it's better. It's every little helps, and I've seen some aerial shots of it. It does actually look fantastic, and Cadwell is a very special place in the group and in the broader context of motorcycle racing in the UK. And I think you have to be really careful with Cadwell. I mean, you could do a potential improvement and ruin it at the same time, if that makes sense. So doing sensible, logical stuff to benefit the people that use it is the key.
Thank you, Stuart. We've got 3 viewer questions in as well. Right, first up, we've got Peter from Louth.
Peter from Louth? That's not Hickman, is it?
Oh, would you believe it?
God, to think he's 33 years old today is a hard life.
Hi, my name's Peter. I'm from Burton-on-Trent, but I currently live in Louth in Lincolnshire. My question for Stuart Higgs is, does the championship have any more plans to further venture into Europe with the championship? I mean, I don't know how anyone else feels, but yeah, I think Mugello would be would be really cool. Just my opinion.
I know it was along the lines of the last question from Chris, but what about Mugello?
Yeah, I think the track hire of Mugello would perhaps be slightly difficult to maintain in these economically challenging times. But I mean, fabulous circuit, but I think that is a little unrealistic at this stage.
Great for camping though.
Great for camping.
I don't know, there's chainsaws going off every night and lawnmower engines, so you might not get any
That's
sleep.
Le Mans, isn't it?
No, and Mugello.
Frightening. We've got a bloke called Thomas from the southwest.
Oh, hello there, Stuart. So I actually have a legitimate question. So obviously where everyone's in lockdown at the minute, there's been a lot of reminiscing of old times. And I see that World Superbike's actually put on Twitter the other day a wildcard race on Donington Park where Neil Holttum won it. And Walker was second when they were both in the official BSB series. My question to you is, why can World Superbikes and British Superbikes not coincide to allow the bike spec or bike specification to allow that similar thing? Because you cannot deny it would be great to see more of that kind of thing in the near future.
I think there's the most number of words for a very simple question.
It was a minute long.
I mean, it makes a very good point. I mean, that the Donington year 2000 round. I mean, that was an incredible year. We'd just come off the back of Hodgson and Walker knocking each other out of contention at the BSB round at Holttum Park, and then literally I think the following weekend was World Superbike at Donington, and it was incredible. I think they finished 1-2 in the first race, and for me that's probably the moment that put BSB on the map. It came of age, and I think you had a good BSB championship at that time, but then I think it really redefined the level. And then the two series have pretty much existed in their parallel operations, and no one's really felt that doing a wild card at a World Superbike round has the same gravitas as probably which it once did. In terms of the bike specs, I mean, technically, I mean, it goes back to the fundamental difference of just on electronics, is that from a mechanical point of view, the regulations are essentially identical. It's just the electronics. In WSB, there's essentially open ECUs, and there are some controls in terms of functionality, but essentially you can do what you want. And in BSB, it's a control ECU. Now, quite simply, without the control ECU, BSB probably wouldn't even exist today. I mean, it was the single defining thing that changed the philosophy of the championship, ripped a whole load of cost out of it, equalised it between all the teams. And I think if you've got to make a choice between whether you can have one good race meeting a year where it might be a bit interesting, or you can have a very strong championship, then you've got to actually choose the championship as the defining answer. I mean, and that's not saying that people can't go and wild card. They do, and they have, and they probably still will. They just don't elect to go and bolt a different ECU on it. I mean, I think we saw Jake Dixon for RAF reserves, regular reserves, in 2018 finishing in the top 10 comfortably. I think any of our top 6 could get in the top 10 of a World Superbike race with their bikes in their current spec. It comes down to economics. As interesting as it is, I just don't think any team can justify for one weekend going and lease a full-blown World Superbike spec bit of kit for one race. The alternative argument, we could say that obviously someone's got to change their rules so that everything's equal. Well, it's a bit illogical for us to upscale our technical rules to make everybody have to have more expensive equipment. It will be easier for the World Championship to do the spec ECU thing, but it's a bit of a different kettle of fish in World Superbikes with the manufacturers. The manufacturers, when they are directly putting the projects together, they want to maintain the freedom on the electronics, and that's the point of deadlock. So all nice ideas. So it's always nice to look back on what was really good at a certain time, and some things have just self-eliminated. So that's kind of where we are.
Well, that seems like a natural end to proceedings. So I'd like to say big, massive thank you to Stuart Higgs, to Chris Holttum, to Chris Newble, and to everyone who's watching. And of course, to our sponsor, Show Your Helmets. Thanks very much, guys. Look, if you're a Bennetts customer and you want to get involved in this kind of thing, just like Chris here did, then get in touch with us. To the best email address is enquiries@bikesocial.co.uk for that. All right, we'll be back next week with episode 4. Until then, stay safe and stay home. Cheers.
Do we applause now?